China spent $2 trillion building entire cities from scratch, luxury resorts on artificial islands, financial districts designed to rival Manhattan, futuristic metropolises with museums, opera houses, and skyscrapers gleaming under perfect streetlights. And then, nobody came. You're about to discover 12 colossal ghost cities where the construction crews finished their work, packed up, and left behind empty shells that were supposed to house millions. Let's start with a $15 billion luxury resort that became a symbol of China's greatest real estate collapse. Evergrande Ocean Flower Island, Hainan. You're looking at 39 hotels rising from artificial islands shaped like flower petals off the coast of Hainan. This was Evergrande's crown jewel, a $15 billion luxury resort that was supposed to become China's answer to Dubai's Palm Islands. Picture this: museums, opera houses, conference centers, yacht clubs, all spread across these sculptured islands in the South China Sea. The company believed wealthy Chinese tourists would flood here for premium beachfront experiences they couldn't get anywhere else on the mainland. But here's what Evergrande didn't account for. Hainan already had luxury resorts. The island was already an established tropical destination. And more critically, they were building this during a time when China's wealthy were increasingly traveling internationally to actual exotic locations. Why stay at a manufactured tropical paradise when you could fly to the Maldives or Bali for the authentic experience? Then 2021 hit. Evergrande's debt crisis exploded into international headlines. $300 billion in liabilities. Construction on Ocean Flower Island stopped cold. Today, you can see partially completed hotel towers standing empty against the tropical sky. Deserted waterfront promenades where no tourists stroll. Conference centers that will never host a single meeting. The flower-shaped islands are there, perfectly sculpted. But the luxury destination that was supposed to bloom across them became a monument to overreach. But Ocean Flower Island was at least designed for leisure and tourism. The next city, too, had far bigger ambitions. Yujiapu Financial District, China's Manhattan, Tianjin. They called it China's Manhattan, and they meant it literally. Yujiapu Financial District in Tianjin was designed with a $40 billion budget to replicate New York's iconic skyline. There's even a building that looks exactly like Rockefeller Center. The vision was simple: turn Tianjin into northern China's financial powerhouse, where international banks and investment firms would establish their headquarters just 75 miles from Beijing. But here's the problem: you can't manufacture a financial center. Shanghai already dominated China's financial sector. Hong Kong had a century of established markets. Tianjin had neither the talent pool nor the organic business activity to fill these towers. No major banks came. No investment firms opened offices. The infrastructure was there, but the finance industry never showed up. Then the debt crisis hit in 2013. Construction stopped. Today you see half-finished skyscrapers with cranes still rusting against them. Empty plazas designed for thousands of professionals. A perfect Manhattan replica standing completely hollow. They built the skyline but forgot that real Manhattan took centuries of organic growth to create. Yujiapu tried to fake a financial hub, but the next city became something far more shocking: Ordos. Kangbashi, new district, Inner Mongolia. Kangbashi was supposed to house 1 million people. They spent $161 billion building a modern metropolis from absolutely nothing in the deserts of Inner Mongolia. Massive government buildings with ornate architecture, museums, stadiums, libraries, opera houses, residential towers stretching across the horizon, wide boulevards with perfect landscaping, grand plazas designed for crowds that would never come. This wasn't just a neighborhood. This was an entire city built on coal wealth, expecting miners and their families would flood here for a better quality of life. Here's what they got wrong. Ordos made its money from coal mining, but coal miners didn't want to live in an expensive new city. They wanted affordable housing near the actual mines. The apartments in Kangbashi were priced for upper-middle-class residents in a region where most people worked blue-collar mining jobs. And as China's coal industry started declining, even fewer people had reason to move here. By the early 2010s, Kangbashi became internationally famous as the world's largest ghost city. News crews flew in from everywhere to film the eerie reality. A city built for 1 million people, housing only 30,000. Entire residential complexes with no lights on at night. Spotless streets with no cars. Museums with no visitors. Government buildings staffed by workers who commuted from elsewhere because they refused to actually live here. The city has seen some population growth in recent years, but it's still drastically underoccupied compared to what was built. Kangbashi became the global symbol of what happens when you build a million-person city and nobody wants to move in. But at least Kangbashi tried to be one unified city. What came next was an entire system of themed fantasy worlds. One city, 9 towns, themed suburbs, Shanghai Metro. Shanghai had a bold solution to its population pressure. Build 9 satellite towns around the city, each one themed after a different European country. A German town, an Italian town, a British town, a Scandinavian town, Spanish, Dutch, Canadian themes. The plan was ambitious. Create distinctive communities with authentic architecture that would attract residents looking for something different while easing overcrowding in central Shanghai. Billions poured into constructing these perfectly replicated European neighborhoods simultaneously. Anting got German architecture with Bauhaus-inspired buildings and Volkswagen branding since the automaker had operations nearby. Pujiang became an Italian village with piazzas, fountains, and Mediterranean-style apartments. Thamstown went full Tudor England with cobblestone streets and a Gothic church. Each town was designed for thousands of permanent residents who would embrace these unique communities. But nobody moved in. The towns were too far from central Shanghai with inadequate transit connections. People working in the city didn't want hour-plus commutes to live in a themed suburb. And Chinese residents didn't necessarily want to live in European replicas when they could afford actual city apartments. The infrastructure was beautiful. The architecture was authentic. But there was no practical reason to choose these locations over established neighborhoods. What you see today is surreal. Perfect German streetscapes with no pedestrians, Italian piazzas where nobody gathers, pristine European architecture functioning as weekend photography destinations for tourists, not actual communities. The towns aren't technically abandoned, but they failed spectacularly at their core purpose of creating thriving satellite communities. But those theme towns were at least near Shanghai. What came next was trying to build an entire political capital from scratch. Zhong'an New Area, Hebei. This is Xi Jinping's personal project. A $300 billion city rising from farmland south of Beijing. Zhong'an New Area was announced in 2017 as China's City of the Future. The vision was massive. Build a metropolis for 2.5 million people that would showcase smart city technology, green ecological planning, and cutting-edge urban design. Government offices would relocate here from the capital. Innovation companies would establish headquarters. It would become a world-class city that relieved pressure on overcrowded Beijing. The expectations were sky-high. State media compared Zhong'an to Shenzhen and Shanghai's Pudong district, both of which transformed from nothing into economic powerhouses. Billions flowed into construction. Modern apartment complexes rose up. Infrastructure for millions got built. The promise was a gleaming example of advanced urban planning. But here's the critical problem. People don't want to move to remote new cities built from scratch. Zhong'an is over 60 miles from Beijing, with limited current amenities, jobs, or established communities. Workers would face brutal commutes. Companies aren't rushing to move operations to an unproven location with no talent pool already there. And everyday citizens have zero interest in being early adopters for an experimental city with no track record. As of 2025, construction continues. But the population is drastically below targets. Buildings stand ready for residents who haven't arrived. Shopping centers wait for customers. Office towers remain mostly dark. Zhong'an might eventually succeed through sheer scale of investment, or it might become the largest ghost city of them all. Right now, it's a very expensive question mark. But Zhong'an at least started with ambition. What came next actually seemed achievable. Zhengdong New Area, Zhengzhou, Henan. Zhengdong was supposed to be Zhengzhou's modern central business district, a futuristic downtown for 2 million people with massive high-rises, wide boulevards, and striking civic architecture. There's a circular art museum that became instantly recognizable in aerial photos, an opera house, government buildings, residential towers stretching for miles. The logic seemed sound. Zhengzhou was growing rapidly as a transportation and manufacturing hub. Build the infrastructure now, and the expanding population would naturally fill it. They built everything at once. Dozens of residential towers, office complexes, shopping districts, the infrastructure for a thriving urban center serving millions. The expectation was that people working in Zhengzhou would jump at the chance to live in modern apartments with better amenities than the older parts of the city. But it didn't happen. By 2013 through 2015, Zhengdong became internationally notorious as a massive ghost city. Those iconic aerial photos showed tower after tower completely dark at night, empty streets despite perfect infrastructure, shopping centers with almost no customers. The problem was timing and location. People already had homes and communities in established Zhengzhou. Moving to Zhengdong meant leaving their social networks, facing potentially longer commutes, and being early adopters in an unproven area. Here's the twist. Unlike most ghost cities, Zhengdong actually did gradually fill up. As Zhengzhou continued growing through the late 2010s and early 2020s, people eventually moved in. Today, it's relatively populated and functioning. But that success came after more than a decade of empty buildings, a decade of wasted carrying costs, maintenance for nobody, and infrastructure serving a fraction of its intended population. But Zhengdong eventually found its people. What came next never found its purpose. Tianducheng, Paris of China, Hangzhou area. They built a 108-meter Eiffel Tower in the suburbs of Hangzhou. Not an inspired-by version, a direct replica standing over Parisian boulevards, houseman-style apartment buildings, ornate fountains, and carefully manicured gardens mimicking Versailles. This was Tianducheng, the Paris of China, designed in the early 2000s to house 10,000 residents who would live in this surreal French fantasy. The developers believed Chinese buyers would pay premium prices for European architectural prestige. Imagine coming home every day to a perfect Parisian neighborhood. French cafes, tree-lined boulevards, your own, Champs-Élysées. The apartments were marketed as luxury living, with a distinctly romantic European flavor that you couldn't get anywhere else in China. But only 2,000 people moved in. The location was too far from central Hangzhou with poor transit connections. The premium pricing made no sense for what was essentially a disconnected suburb. And living in a replica Paris lost its charm quickly when you realized you were still miles from actual jobs, schools, and established communities. The French architecture was beautiful, but beautiful doesn't matter when your daily life is inconvenient. Tianducheng found a different purpose entirely. It became a wedding photography destination. Couples flock here on weekends to take photos under the Eiffel Tower in wedding gowns and tuxedos. The boulevards fill with photographers and brides. Then Monday comes and everyone leaves. The perfect Parisian streetscapes sit empty again. It's functioning, technically, just not as anyone intended. But Tianducheng was at least a small suburb. What came next tried to be an entire new district. Dantu New District, Zhenjiang, Jiangsu. Dantu was built to solve a straightforward problem. Old Zhenjiang was getting congested, so the local government invested billions building a modern new district that could house hundreds of thousands of people. Wide boulevards, apartment complexes, parks, civic buildings, shopping centers, all the infrastructure a thriving district needs. The expectation was simple. People living in cramped conditions in old Zhenjiang would naturally migrate to newer, more spacious housing. But nobody came. The district sits there with pristine infrastructure and almost no residents. Streetlights illuminate empty roads every night. Apartment towers stand dark. Shopping centers have no customers. Playgrounds have no children. It's a fully functional district, waiting for a population that refuses to show up. The problem was convenience and community. Old Zhenjiang had jobs, schools, social networks, and established neighborhoods. People knew their neighbors. Their lives were built there. Dantu offered newer buildings, but required giving up everything familiar. The commute to existing jobs would be longer. Family and friends weren't moving. And Chinese cities have strong neighborhood cultures where people have lived in the same area for generations. Moving to a brand new district with no community meant starting over socially. So, Dantu sits there, maintained, functioning, empty. The government keeps the lights on and maintains the roads for barely anyone. It's one of the most practical ghost cities on this list. No grand ambitions, no fantasy theming. Just a regular new district that completely miscalculated whether people would actually want to leave their existing communities. But at least Dantu tried to be practical. What came next was pure British fantasy. Thames Town, Songjiang, Shanghai. Picture a perfect English market town. Tudor-style buildings with timber frames, cobblestone streets, red phone booths, a Gothic church with a clock tower, fish and chips shops, even a British-style pub. This is Thames Town in Shanghai's Songjiang district, built in 2006 as an authentic slice of England designed for 10,000 residents. British architects were brought in to ensure every detail was accurate. The vision was unique residential appeal. Chinese buyers would pay premium prices to live in an English town without leaving China. Imagine the prestige of giving your address as Thames Town, walking cobblestone streets to your Tudor home, living in architectural authenticity that no other development could match. But almost nobody moved in. The same problems plagued Thames Town as every other themed suburb. Too far from central Shanghai. No compelling reason to choose this location over established neighborhoods. And the English theming, while beautiful, didn't translate into practical daily living advantages. You still needed to commute to work. Your kids still needed schools. And living in a replica English town doesn't make your life easier. Thames Town found an unexpected use. It became a wedding photography hotspot. Every weekend, the streets fill with couples in gowns and tuxedos posing against Tudor buildings and red phone booths. Photographers pack the church and cobblestone lanes. It's bustling with activity. Then Sunday evening hits, and everyone drives back to Shanghai. The weekdays are completely silent. The fish and chips shops stay closed. The pub has no patrons. It's functioning as an elaborate movie set, not a community. But Thames Town at least gets weekend visitors. What came next gets almost nothing. Nanhui, Lingang, New City, Shanghai Dishui Lake area. Lingang was built around a perfectly circular artificial lake, Dishui Lake, designed as the centerpiece of a self-sufficient satellite city for 800,000 people, 50 miles southeast of Shanghai. The vision was comprehensive. Universities, industrial parks, residential towers, waterfront promenades. Billions went into creating futuristic architecture and infrastructure for a population that would work, live, and thrive in this lakefront metropolis. The planning seemed logical. Shanghai was expanding rapidly. Build ahead of the growth and people would naturally flow outward as the city limits pushed further. The lake provided a stunning visual anchor. The infrastructure was world-class. Everything was in place for a modern city to emerge. But through the mid-2010s, Lingang stood almost completely empty. Those massive apartment towers overlooking the pristine circular lake had barely any lights on at night. The wide boulevards designed for traffic sat vacant. Universities had campuses but struggled to attract students. The problem was distance and isolation. 50 miles from central Shanghai meant brutal commutes. No established job market existed locally. And people don't want to pioneer remote cities when they can live in actual Shanghai with all its amenities and opportunities. Tesla's Gigafactory opening in Lingang in 2019 started changing things. Improved metro connections helped, and by the early 2020s, population slowly grew. But even now, Lingang sits drastically below its planned 800,000 residents. It took 15 years just to get partial occupancy. 15 years of empty infrastructure, waiting for people to decide it was finally convenient enough. But Lingang at least has Shanghai's growth eventually pushing outward. What came next had Beijing nearby, but still failed completely. Wonderland Amusement Park, Beijing. Construction started in 1998 on what was supposed to be China's answer to Disneyland. Wonderland Amusement Park on Beijing's outskirts was designed for 10 million visitors annually. Medieval castle facades, multiple themed areas, massive infrastructure for rides, shows, and attractions. The developers saw China's growing middle class and believed they'd found an untapped market desperate for world-class entertainment. The location made sense. Just outside Beijing meant access to millions of potential visitors. Chinese families were gaining disposable income and looking for entertainment options. Build a spectacular theme park and they would come by the millions. The castle structure started rising. The footprint sprawled across enormous acreage. Everything pointed toward becoming China's premier entertainment destination. Then construction stopped. Funding collapsed. Land disputes emerged. Different phases of building halted at different times. But eventually, the entire project was abandoned. Not scaled back. Not postponed. Completely abandoned, without ever opening a single day. What remains is haunting. Castle facades with steel frameworks exposed and rusting. Sections of rides that were never completed. Construction equipment left to decay. And here's the surreal part. Farmland slowly reclaimed the site. Crops started growing. Between deteriorating fairy tale architecture, local farmers literally planted corn around the rusting medieval castle pieces. Wonderland became an early warning that nobody heeded. This was 1998, showing that massive construction projects could fail spectacularly in China. That building infrastructure doesn't guarantee people will come. But developers kept building anyway. And what came next was the most ambitious retail failure on the planet. South China Mall. Dongguan. The South China Mall opened in 2005 as the largest shopping mall on Earth. 9.6 million square feet. Space for 2,350 stores. 7 zones themed after different world cities. An indoor roller coaster. A canal with gondolas. An Arc de Triomphe replica. This wasn't just a mall. This was a destination shopping experience designed to attract millions of customers who would spend entire days exploring this retail wonderland. The developers saw China's exploding consumer class and bet everything on it. Dongguan was a manufacturing hub with growing wealth. Build the world's largest mall, and retailers would fight for space. Shoppers would flood in from across the region. The sheer scale and spectacle would make it a must-visit destination. Every major brand would want presence in the world's biggest shopping center. But 99% of it sat vacant for years. Almost no retailers opened stores. The massive corridors echoed empty. The themed zones had no shops to theme. The roller coaster never ran. The gondolas never floated customers down the canal. The problem was location and timing. The mall was poorly positioned away from residential density. Dongguan's wealth was concentrated in factory owners, not a broad consumer base. And Chinese shopping habits were already shifting toward online retail, just as this physical megamall opened. Walking through South China Mall at its emptiest was surreal. Millions of square feet of pristine retail space with almost nobody there. Shuttered storefronts stretching endlessly. The architecture and infrastructure for thousands of thriving businesses sitting completely unused. Some occupancy eventually came by the 2010s, but it never came close to filling. You've just seen $2 trillion in construction for cities, resorts, financial districts, and retail destinations that nobody wanted. Millions of empty apartments, office towers with no workers, shopping centers with no customers, theme parks that never opened, entire metropolises standing hollow. China built supply at a scale never seen in human history and assumed demand would automatically follow. It didn't. And somewhere right now, another development is being planned that will make the same mistake.